Robert Brighton. Welcome back to the course, and today we're going to dive into something really exciting. Punctuation. Well, I'm kind of kidding, but I'm also kind of serious. We are going to talk about punctuation, but I'm not going to bore you to death with punctuation because if you're an aspiring writer, you want to know what the major forms of punctuation are. Roughly speaking, they are commas, semicolons, colons, periods, dashes, exclamation points, question marks. But we're not going to talk about exclamation points and question marks. We're going to talk about commas, semicolons, colons, periods, and dashes. Not too many dashes today. They will serve a similar purpose as either a semicolon or colon, as we'll see. But what I want to talk about more than punctuation, and by the way, if you don't know what those things are, I mean, you'll recognize when you see them. If for any reason you don't recognize what a colon or semicolon is, just Google it, read up on it. You're not going to go far wrong by reading a dictionary definition of them. What I'm hoping to share with you today is how I use them in the composition of prose. This is going to be applicable to any kind of prose, nonfiction or fiction. Although I would say that it's probably even more useful for fiction because the function, in my opinion, of punctuation is the same function that rests have in music. If you're familiar with music, you don't have to be a musician, but if you're familiar with music, you know musical notation is notes on a staff and a variety of other symbols, some of which are rests, which tell the musician how long to pause, where to pause, and how long to pause to give the music its flow, to keep the music moving or to slow it down. Okay, so I use punctuation in exactly the same way, which is not to say that I don't follow most of the rules of using punctuation. So for example, you could look this up on your own, but I favor the so-called Oxford comma. X, comma, Y, comma, and Z. Some people do it X, comma, Y, no comma, and Z. So I don't do that. That's kind of a rule. You can follow it or you don't. I happen to follow that one. But we're not going to talk about all the rules. We're going to talk about how to use these things in writing your own sort of music with words. The way I'd like to start is I'd like to read you a short passage that I think uses punctuation really, really well. This is the very famous first line. I think it's just one line. No, it's more than one line, but it's only a few lines. The first line or three of Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House. Now, The Haunting of Hill House, a very well-known novella, a short novel that's very creepy and happens in this kind of old haunted house called Hill House. But today's lesson has to do with how Mrs. Jackson used punctuation in this very famous first section to give the words not just the impact that the words themselves are bringing, but to add to that impact by giving you the right musical structure, the keys and the direction onto where to pause. And pauses, silence in general, is as important as sound in music, but it's true in prose as well. Pauses help you gather your strength for the next phrase, or allow the reader to rest between thoughts, or change the subject slightly. All of these things can be accomplished with the proper use of punctuation. So we're going to spend a little time on this, but I'm going to do it through examples and not through some kind of dry talk about when to use a comma and so forth. So, The Haunting of Hill House begins this way. No live organism can continue for long to exist sanely under conditions of absolute reality. Even larks and katydids are supposed by some to dream. Hill House, not sane, stood by itself against its hills, holding darkness within. It had stood so for 80 years and might stand for 80 more. Within, walls continued upright, bricks met neatly, floors were firm and doors were sensibly shut. Silence lay steadily against the wood and stone of Hill House, and whatever walked there walked alone. Well, that doesn't sound like a place I'd like to spend any time in, like an Airbnb. If that's the ad for the Airbnb, I'm going to continue to scroll on. But it is a stunning opening to a story. Who wouldn't continue reading that story after hearing that or reading that first little section? So I want to go through now, sort of line by line. We'll look at this on the screen, and I want to point out how Mrs. Jackson uses punctuation to create this wonderful effect, this creepy effect, this slow unraveling, almost like losing your mind as you're reading this thing. So, in the first sentence, no live organism can continue for long to exist sanely under conditions of absolute reality. Wow, that's a statement. Think about that. But what she does now is, after that statement, she gives you a semicolon. A semicolon is a pause. It's not as long a pause as a colon or a period. Period is a full stop. A colon, I think, is almost equivalent to a period, but it connects two thoughts that are related, and so I don't think of it as a full stop. A semicolon is just a little briefer, but it's a longer pause than a comma, and it allows the reader to digest that very strange statement about reality. Under conditions of absolute reality, semicolon, even larks and katydids, now we resume, even larks and katydids are supposed, comma, by some, comma, to dream. Well, that little parenthetical statement, by some, set off by two commas, just enough of a pause to set it off visually and in terms of its musical flow. There, you could say even larks and katydids are supposed to dream, or are thought to dream. You could do that. Of course, it's not bad. But even larks and katydids are supposed by some to dream. Well, that little phrase makes the reader wonder, well, who thinks that? It's thought by some. Do I think that? Do others think that? Is it normal to think that or abnormal to think that? Mrs. Jackson starts to get us thinking about the very nature of reality. This focuses on her first statement that you can't remain sane under conditions of absolute reality. Now she's building on that. Even larks and katydids, first of all, where did she get those two things? That's brilliant. Larks and katydids. Anyway, they are supposed, comma, by some to dream, not by all. Okay, let's go on. Hill House, comma, not sane, comma. You see again another small, short parenthetical phrase that modifies Hill House. Hill House, not sane. That doesn't allow for any interpretation. I just told you something about that house. Not sane, comma, stood by itself against the hills, comma, holding darkness within. Another semicolon. Now, semicolons get a bad rap, and in fact, I don't use them all that frequently. Some have said, some believe katydids dream too, but some have said that semicolons are neither colon nor comma. They're somewhere in between, and they are. They're not one or the other. They're neither fish nor fowl, but they're very useful because sometimes you do want a pause that's just a little longer than a comma, but not quite as definitive and declarative as a colon, which really brings you almost to a full stop. So, Hill House, comma, not stained, comma, stood by itself against its hills, comma, holding darkness within, semicolon, pause. It had stood so for 80 years and might stand for 80 more. Now that's one long phrase without any punctuation except the period at the end. Within, comma, within the house, but within. What does that mean? Does that mean within us, within the house? The comma sets that word off, and the comma forces you to pause. Within. Walls continued upright, comma. Bricks met neatly, comma. Floors were firm, comma. And doors, that's at Oxford, comma. Bricks met neatly, comma. Floors were firm, comma. And doors were sensibly shut. Now another semicolon, okay? It's unusual to use so many semicolons in one stretch, but she does it beautifully, okay? I'm just telling you, she does it beautifully. Floors were firm and doors were sensibly shut, semicolon. Silence lay steadily against the wood and stone of Hill House, comma. And whatever walked there, comma, walked alone. Now, you see what she did with that last parenthetical phrase, comma, and whatever walked there, comma. Oh, my word. Something's walking there? What does that mean? And it forces you to read that slowly, more slowly than if there were no commas setting it off. And then the final thing after the comma, walked alone. Well, that's wonderful. And I'll make just a couple of other observations here about this very tasty paragraph that have nothing to do with punctuation, but I do want to point them out while we're on it. I love this. Silence lay steadily. The S, it's a sibilant. It's a soft sound. It's the hissing. Silence lay steadily against the wood and stone. Do you see how she uses a combination of very soft consonants, the sibilants, the S's? Silence lay steadily. Silence is a sibilant sort of state. All right? Silence lay steadily against the wood and stone. Wood and stone are very hard, very real materials. Wood, stone. But now silence or steady silence. So there's that drifting sound of silence and then the hard sounds of the materials of which Hill House is constructed. Love that. And then the other thing I'll just point out here while we're at it, I touched on it earlier, this business of Hill House being not sane. She could have said insane, but there's something even weirder about being not sane. Because what I think it suggests there is insane means you've sort of gone off the deep end. You're in some other reality entirely, to the point where, even anything normal probably doesn't appear to you as normal or whatever. But not sane helps to amplify the notion that under conditions of absolute reality, no one can or nothing can remain sane. Even larks and katydids need to sleep, need to rest, need to reset their mind. But there's something about the mind of Hill House that has to confront its reality straight in the face every single day. And this confrontation has driven the house out of its mind. We could spend a lot of time unpacking this paragraph, but I hope that this has been helpful because, to recap, I think of punctuation in the same way I think of musical rests. It tells the reader or it tells the speaker where to pause and what to emphasize. Those are very, very critical functions, and they're much more important than following slavishly the rules of how something's supposed to be used. I urge you to know and understand the rules. It's always good to know the rules, and if you decide to bend or break them, then at least you're doing so consciously, not out of ignorance. So that's the function, to me, of punctuation. Punctuation is a way of capturing the cadences of the spoken word in the written word, which is just symbols on the page or the screen. And the other thing, just to recap, is that Mrs. Jackson uses punctuation here very effectively. She only uses semicolons, commas, and periods. No colons, no dashes. But with that little arsenal of punctuation, she makes this into a really, really creepy and well-written piece. So I hope you've gotten something out of this. We'll talk more about using punctuation and developing the right kind of tempo in your writing, speeding up, slowing down, and all that. And punctuation, one way to do that. There are other ways to do that. We'll talk about those as well. But for the meantime, thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it.